and Dave can try to answer them. We hope you ask some really hard ones.
Mm-hmm.
And we're about to start. And the best question does get a $5 bill, as you can see here. So I'll go ahead and introduce David Quammen. I think he's written 17 different books. He's what we call a science writer. He immerses right into the science. Every book that he's written, as far as I know, at least the ones I've read, have a lot of references at the back. He doesn't just wing it. He really looks at the scientific literature. Why he lives in Bozeman, I don't know, but he's sequestered up here, and we're lucky to have him. He wrote the book Spillover. Spillover, I don't know, you probably sold a few copies, didn't you? New York Times bestseller, yes.
Yeah, it did. It was briefly a Times bestseller in 2012. I'm told now that it's a big bestseller in Italy right now.
The people that are still alive in Italy are now reading it.
Yeah, right.
What went wrong?
It's ironically, it's enjoying a renewed vogue for obvious reasons. It's about pandemics.
And what's really interesting about pandemics is each one is different. And sometimes we think we learned from the last one, and then a whole new different type of virus comes along or bacteria comes along, and we have to be scientists again. Is that right? Is that the way you look at it?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Gosh, he said yes to me. But we've had a lot of fun together in discussions of this kind of thing. He's lectured in this class before, and we'll let David Quammen, author of Spillover, resident of Bozeman, Montana, take it from there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dave. I should be wearing my In Sympathy. I should be wearing my mask too, but not really necessary since I'm sitting in my house. I'm really glad to have a chance to talk with you and to brainstorm with you all this morning. I hope you do have some good hard questions. I'll talk for half an hour and cut it there so that we can have some conversation back and forth. I'm going to talk about pandemics, of course, and the phenomenon of spillover. Let me just lay down a couple of definitions as a starting point. Spillover. Spillover is that moment when a virus or an infectious bacterium or a pathogen of some sort spills from its natural host into a human host. Now, that leads us to the subject of zoonotic diseases. Zoonotic diseases are animal infections transmissible to humans. And this current pandemic is a zoonotic disease, an animal infection that's transmissible from non-human animals into humans. And the point of first transmission from the non-human animal into the human, that is the spillover. Spillover can yield an outbreak of, say, a few dozen cases of a new disease. If an outbreak spreads across a country, we call that an epidemic. And if it gets on planes and spreads around the world, that's a pandemic. Okay, this is obvious stuff, but I'm just getting us all on the same page. I'm going to eventually come to the subject of the fact that this pandemic that we're now going through is not an independent event. It's not something unique that's happening to us. It is part of a pattern, and that pattern reflects things that we humans are doing. We can expect that this will not be the last one. We need now urgently to figure out a few things: how we get control of this pandemic and get our lives and our safety and our economies back, how we prepare for the next one, and make ourselves better able to deal with the next one, because as I said, there will be a next one. But I want to try a little something. I've been talking about this nonstop for the last 6 months. Dave mentioned my book Spillover. That was published in 2012. And it rather precisely predicts this pandemic, not because I was prescient, but because the scientists that I talked to while I was researching that 10 years ago could see this coming. So I essentially said in that book, on the authority of these scientists that I was talking to, following around the world as they did their field work in forests and on the rooftops of warehouses in Bangladesh and in caves in southern China. On their authority, I pointed out that we should expect a pandemic sometime soon. It would be the next big one. It would be caused by a zoonotic virus, a virus coming out of a wild animal. What kind of wild animal? Well, very possibly a bat. What kind of virus? Well, very possibly either an influenza virus or a coronavirus. Where might this happen? Well, someplace where humans come in contact with wild animals, for instance, in or near what we call a wet market, where wildlife is sold live for food amid all sorts of other groceries and products. Where might that happen? Well, for instance, in China. All of that was in my book in 2012, thanks to these scientists that I was listening to. So that fact has led people to turn back to me, among other talking heads, over the last 6 months of this pandemic, and say, would you please explain this to us, and why you and these scientists could see this coming, excuse me, and what we can expect next, and why the warnings were not heeded that this was coming. So that's what I've been doing for a large part of my time for the last 6 months. I want to try something a little bit different from most of the talks and the Q&As that I've done. And I think it might be a fruitful way of looking at this. And that is, I want to look at this from the point of view of the virus, from the point of view of viruses generally. And somehow I've got a frog in my throat. Excuse me. So we, excuse me, we live in a world of viruses. Scientists don't even know how many. Excuse me just a second. This is very frustrating. My voice has been fine all morning. Excuse me. We live in a world of viruses. Scientists don't even know how many. Excuse me. By one estimate, there are 320,000 viruses simply among the mammal species of the world. There are about 6,500 species of mammals. Nobody knows exactly how many unique viruses live within each species of mammal, but there's an estimate that it might be as many as 320,000. In terms of vertebrate animals generally, there might be as many as 3.5 million unique kinds of virus living in the vertebrate animals on planet Earth. All viruses, as I'm sure you well know, need a living cellular creature as a host. They invade the cells of a cellular creature, and the cell apparatus is hijacked, and that allows a virus to replicate itself. So viruses need hosts, and the viruses that potentially can become pathogens of humans, almost without exception, come from animal hosts, and that means wild animals. Those many species, I think it's 60,000 or more species of vertebrate animals and other animals on the planet. So each have their unique viruses. So here are all these viruses, and they need hosts. They follow Darwinian imperatives. just like all other living creatures do. A virus doesn't have purpose, it doesn't have desires, but it follows Darwinian imperatives, and those imperatives tell it to replicate itself, make more copies of itself, reproduce itself, have offspring, and extend itself in geographical space and in time. Those are the Darwinian imperatives. Viruses have genomes, they have genetic variation. So as they struggle to achieve those goals, they're subject to evolution by natural selection. They compete, they mutate, they evolve, they adapt. Now, picture a virus, one particular virus living in a particular animal host. Let's look at a species of bat called Hill's horseshoe bat, named after some person named Hill. Hill's horseshoe bat. The scientific name for this is Rhinolophus hilli. It's a critically endangered species of bat that lives only in Rwanda in East Africa. It lives in tropical moist forest, that's its habitat. It feeds on insects. It roosts in caves. This little species of insect-eating bat with a funny little nose that gives it the name a horseshoe bat. It belongs to this genus, Rhinolophus. It's one of the kinds of horseshoe bat, but it is the most endangered species of horseshoe bat and one of the most endangered species of bat on the planet. All right. So Hill's horseshoe bat has viruses. We know that. We don't know specifically what they are, but we know it is a unique species. It's got its own unique viruses. Let's imagine one of those viruses. Let's just call it Hill's coronavirus. It is a type of coronavirus that is unique to this species of bat, Hill's horseshoe bat. Okay? So in Rwanda, there's mining going on, there's logging going on. People are trying to feed themselves. They're cutting down forests. They're planting gardens. Habitat is disappearing, and Hill's horseshoe bat is disappearing. And therefore, Hill's coronavirus faces a very uncertain future. If Hill's horseshoe bat goes extinct, Hill's coronavirus, which is a passenger, which is a parasite on that particular species of bat, it could potentially go extinct too. It therefore needs to be awake to opportunity to rescue itself from this situation where it's circling the drain. Its host species is threatened with extinction. So what's the virus going to do? All right. Along comes a person. A person goes into one of those caves in Rwanda. Person decides that he wants to shovel out some bat guano to fertilize his garden. So he starts filling sacks in the cave with bat guano. There's dust in the cave. There's powdered guano that's rising. The air is thick with particulates of all sorts, including some of the virus particles of Hill's virus. That human being swallows or inhales some of those virus particles of Hill's virus and becomes infected. He comes out of the cave. A day later, he has a fever. 2 days later, he's coughing. And he gets very sick. His family gather around him. They wonder what's wrong with him. Has somebody put a spell on him? Has he got malaria? What's wrong? He's coughing. He's spewing. He infects some of his family. They take him to a local clinic. At the clinic, they try and treat him for malaria or for some other sort of a fever. But they have never seen this particular fever before because they've never seen this particular virus in a human. He infects a few more people. A cluster of people. Now there's an outbreak of Hill's coronavirus disease in humans, a completely new disease. This is all hypothetical, what I'm saying, but I want you to see this from the point of view of the virus. One of the people that he infects is a doctor working at this clinic in Rwanda. That doctor travels back by car to the capital of Rwanda. I forget what the capital city of Rwanda is. And gets on a plane for Nairobi to go to a conference. Infects a few people on the plane. This virus starts to travel. You can see where this is going. If this virus has the ability not only to infect a human, but to adapt quickly enough to make itself transmissible from human to human, then this virus has just seized the golden opportunity. This virus has just gone from a sinking lifeboat on to the Queen Elizabeth II, onto the Diamond Princess, onto a ship, a great ship. And that ship represents new habitat. We humans are the new habitat. So Hill's coronavirus spreads around the world and it causes a pandemic. It turns out to be very transmissible. It might not be too lethal. It might kill only 1 in 100 or 1 in 200 of the people it infects. It might have the capacity to replicate in a human and spread on the coughs or even the spoken word of a human before the person starts to cough, before the person starts to show symptoms. If so, it's a very insidious, well-adapted virus. Now people are traveling around the world. They don't know that they're sick, but they're carrying Hill's coronavirus out of Rwanda to the rest of the world. 6 months later, there are millions of people around the world who are suffering Hill's coronavirus disease, and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people have died. So what has happened? Well, from a human perspective, a terrible event has happened. There's been a pandemic of Hill's coronavirus, the Rwanda virus. But from the point of view of the virus has just rescued itself from a desperate situation, going extinct within this one little species of bat. It has seized the most abundant and opportune new host in the world, Homo sapiens, and it has achieved great Darwinian success. So that after 6 months, Hill's coronavirus is one of the most successful viruses on the planet. All right, so that's how this works from the point of view of the virus. Now, obviously, we're not talking about Hill's coronavirus these days. We're talking about a real pandemic, and it's caused by a different virus. It's caused by what we call SARS-CoV-2, the COVID-19 virus. Didn't come out of Rwanda. It came out of China, central China. Almost certainly came from a bat. What kind of bat? A horseshoe bat. Was it Hill's horseshoe bat? No, that's just this little endangered species in Rwanda. It was a different species of bat. It was the intermediate horseshoe bat, almost certainly, Rhinolophus affinus. That bat roosts in caves in provinces in China, including Yunnan province, which is adjacent to Hubei province, where the city of Wuhan is located. And we know from very good molecular biological evidence that has been produced not just in the last 6 months, but over the last 10 years, that this new virus infecting humans is a fairly close match to a virus that was already known in the intermediate horseshoe bat in China. There is a very, very interesting woman, scientist named Zhengli Shi. Dr. Zhengli Shi at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. For the past 15 to 20 years, she has been studying coronaviruses in the bats of China. She and her team have been going out to caves and to old abandoned mine shafts in China where horseshoe bats roost. And they have been capturing bats, taking fecal samples and taking saliva swabs from these bats, going back to their laboratories and mostly using the method of PCR, polymerase chain reaction. They have amplified and sequenced fragments of DNA and RNA from these bats. Coronaviruses are RNA viruses, so their genomes are coded in the molecule RNA, not DNA. But when you start amplifying things in a laboratory, you convert RNA to DNA, you amplify it, and then you can sequence it. So Zhengli Shi and her group have been sequencing fragments of virus found in different bats in China, and particularly coronaviruses. And they have assembled sort of a catalog of different viral genomes that they have pieced together, partial genomes or whole genomes. And they have been warning the world, beware of coronaviruses. They've been saying this for 10 years at least. Beware of coronaviruses, in particular, from the sort of horseshoe bats that we have here in southern and central China. Why? Because some of these viruses are very similar to the SARS virus that spilled over from bats in 2002, got into humans, spread around the world, caused a great scare, got into Hong Kong. It was passing from human to human. In Hong Kong, it spread through a hotel where one infected man from southern China was staying during the time of a family wedding. That man got very sick on the 9th floor of this hotel, the Metropole Hotel in Hong Kong, where he was staying. And he eventually went back to Guangdong province and resumed his life, recovered, but he spread this virus to people who were staying in that hotel on the 9th floor. They got up in the morning and got on planes. This is all happening now in 2003, early 2003. They were infected. They didn't know it. They got up, they got on planes. They flew back from their vacations in Hong Kong to Beijing, to Bangkok, to Hanoi, to Singapore, and to Toronto, taking this virus with them. And then there were outbreaks in all of those cities. Nobody knew what this virus was. They were calling it an abnormal pneumonia. Finally, they sequenced the virus and they saw it's a coronavirus. And it was causing sudden acute respiratory syndrome. Sudden acute respiratory syndrome. So they named that syndrome SARS, and they called this the SARS virus. Back to Zhengli Shi, over the last 10 years, she's been finding viruses that in bats that very closely resemble the original SARS virus, and she has been warning the world in scientific articles, beware. Beware of these coronaviruses that live in bats. Some of them are very similar to SARS. They can potentially enter respiratory cells in the human respiratory tract. One particular group of cells that has a particular kind of molecular handle on the outside, they can latch onto that handle and bind to that receptor, enter those cells, replicate, make the human sick, and then spread from the respiratory tract. We can talk about what those particular cells are and the binding mechanism if you want, but the important point is that Zhengli Shi and her colleagues could see all of this coming. They could see it coming, and they were warning about coronaviruses that live in bats. All right, so then suddenly in early 2020, we have reports of an abnormal pneumonia spreading from person to person in the city of Wuhan, China. Samples are taken, a virus is found, the virus is sequenced, the virus is another coronavirus. Alarm bells ring all over the world in the minds of people who know what coronaviruses can do. And other people say, yeah, oh, it's just another flu. The scientists could see how serious this potentially was because this virus was similar. Now, according to Zhengli Shi's work, this virus was somewhat similar to the original SARS virus in terms of its genome, maybe 80% similar, but it was 96% similar to a virus that she had found in a bat in the province of Yunnan in an old mine shaft 5 years before. And she had been warning about that virus. And so now here is this virus. It's a 96% match to that. This represents the very, very strong evidence that this virus, our COVID-19 virus, had its origin in a bat. in China, in Hubei province, perhaps in Yunnan province, perhaps. Somehow it passed from that bat into a human. But 96% similar is not identical. It's actually dissimilar enough to represent decades of independent evolution, maybe 40 or 50 years. So this closest match that we know in this bat that Zheng Li identified is only a cousin of our coronavirus. And those two lineages of virus may have been in different bat populations for as long as 40 or 50 years, evolving separately, diverging. And then somehow the virus that's in humans passed from its bat host, possibly through an intermediate host, another kind of animal. What kind of an animal? Well, maybe a pangolin, what they call a scaly anteater, maybe some other kind of animal, and got from either the bat or this other animal into a single human victim. When did that happen? And where did it happen? Well, you hear the story told that it happened at a wet market in the city of Wuhan. The name of that market is the Huanan Seafood Wholesale Market. Why do people say that? Because of the first 41 identified cases of this virus in the city of Wuhan, most of them were associated with that market. But as people noted, after that story had spread, not all of the first 41 cases were connected with that market. And the very first case, the person who fell sick on December 1st of last year, had no known contact with that market. So this is evidence strongly suggesting that this virus was circulating among humans in the city of Wuhan before December, as early as November or possibly earlier, passing quietly from human to human, causing maybe disease, respiratory disease, but not a pattern yet that anyone had identified. And it wasn't until December when a pattern started to emerge. More and more people infecting one another with this new abnormal pneumonia, the virus being sequenced, it being identified as a new coronavirus. That's the point when we recognized what was going on. But it probably had already happened in November or October in Wuhan. Spillover from an animal of some sort into the first human victim, and then humans and not animals probably carried it into that wet market, a place where infection was possible because it was crowded and people were moving close together among the stalls of this market. So that's what we think we know. That's what I've been writing about for the magazine work that I've been doing in the last few months for the New Yorker magazine. I've just finished a piece that's coming out in about, I think it goes online on Monday and comes out in the New Yorker magazine in about a week and a half, talking about this moment of spillover from a bat into either humans or into another animal, such as a pangolin, and eventually into humans. Why is it important for us to know where this all began, what the animal host was, and how the spillover from that host occurred, whether there was an intermediate host? Why is it important? Well, it might be useful in developing therapies to treat this virus and possibly even an effective vaccine against this virus. But even more obviously, understanding how this one began, how the spillover occurred, will help us defend against the next one, will help us be better prepared, will help us take precautions in terms of separating humans from the animals that carry the viruses that are most likely to cause the next human pandemic. And so that's where we are, trying to learn the origin story of this virus, even while we're trying to develop vaccines and therapies and public health measures that can control this virus. I think that might be a good place for me to pause, Dave, and ask for questions. That's the story that I'm following. That's the particular side of it that I'm paying close attention to and spending all my days sitting here. As you said, I read a lot of journal articles, sitting here reading stacks of journal articles. So let's ask for questions and see what people are curious about, what parts of this are most concerned and most interest to them.
Okay. Can you hear me? Question. Can you just yell it really loud? Take the mask off and yell it really loud. The question is, how does the virus know to spread? I think he talked about the Darwinian imperative. Could you reiterate a little about the Darwinian imperative?
Yes. The Darwinian imperative for a virus, as for all other forms of living thing, is to replicate itself as abundantly as possible, create offspring, to reproduce, and to extend itself in space and time, in geographical space and through time. So any creature, if it's a bird, a species of bird, the birds want to create more birds of that particular species. They're competing to produce offspring, and then the offspring look for habitat. And if the habitat is filled with their parents and their uncles and aunts already occupying territories, then the birds disperse and they go looking for new habitat where they can make a living themselves and reproduce. So that dispersal instinct is dispersing themselves in space. If there's an abundance of any particular creature, there's competition for resources, and the offspring will disperse themselves in space to find new habitat, to find new resources, to escape the crowding competition and get somewhere where they can make a living. And then they will replicate themselves as abundantly as they can and try and make sure that they have offspring, extending themselves and their genomes in time from generation to generation, as well as in space into new habitat wherever they can find it. Those are the Darwinian imperatives. Viruses follow those. And so viruses are constantly, they're not seeking, but they are ready to seize opportunities. So if a virus spills from one kind of host into another kind, from a bat into a human, and once it's inside the human, it finds cells that it is capable of entering and using to reproduce itself, just the way it used cells in its original host, the bat. If it can do that, then it has seized an opportunity. It might disperse into a new host and not find cells where it can reproduce itself, in which case it's come to a dead end. Many are called, but few are chosen. But when it does succeed, then it replicates and moves onward in space and time.
Let's try another question with a shorter answer. Somebody raise their hand. Okay, you back there. I'm coming. We'll try this.
Did the research done into the 96% match virus help any at all with the research being done in the current COVID?
Well, it helps in terms of telling us where this virus came from. It tells us that this virus is almost certainly a bat virus. Yes, in that sense, it certainly helps. Otherwise, we would say this is a virus and we've never seen it in humans before. Where does it come from? We don't know. We have no idea. So this 96% match tells us that this came out of bats, and that tells us that we need to stay away from horseshoe bats if we want to prevent more spillovers of other new coronaviruses into humans.
Question.
Yes. If researchers saw this coronavirus pandemic happening, years ago, could they have started basic research on a vaccine, or did they want to wait for human infection to start a vaccine?
No, that's a very good question. The Zheng Lishi and others who saw this coming, one of the things they were saying was that yes, we should be prepared for coronavirus outbreaks, and that would include developing what they call vaccine platforms. There should have been funding and impetus for efforts to create coronavirus vaccine platforms. In other words, a sort of a generalized coronavirus vaccine that in a short period of time could have been modified to be specifically a COVID-19 vaccine.
Okay, I
Absolutely,
have a
that was one of the
question.
messages, and the message was not heard. And so, so now
David,
we're coming from behind.
David, how
Yes.
many people in this class would be willing to volunteer for a vaccine right now? Raise your hand if yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 12. How many no? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 no. Now, if the 12 do get vaccinated and the 4 do not, is that good enough, David?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so you're talking about herd immunity. Say there's a population of only 16 people living isolated, 12 of them get vaccinated and 4 do not. A virus comes in, it might infect one of the unvaccinated people, but that person represents a small enough percentage of that 16-person universe of humans that the virus might not spread from one human to another because that particular person might not come in contact with any of the other 3 unvaccinated people. And that's what you call herd immunity.
So we'll say, how many of you have never been vaccinated for anything? Raise your hand.
Wow.
Oh, a heck of a lot of them.
Wow. Really? Never been vaccinated for anything. Okay.
For anything.
Let me ask a question of one of those people. This is simply a matter of curiosity. Why? Why not? Why never vaccinated against measles, mumps, flu, or anything?
I misheard your question, and I thought you were asking if they had been vaccinated. So I have been vaccinated.
Oh, has everybody here been vaccinated? That's the question. Raise your hand if you haven't. Oh, that's better. Okay, that was fake news. Okay, go on.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes,
He
sir.
deals with a lot of scientists. Scientists love their own work, and they write grants, and they become in love with their own work. And sometimes it takes several years to get published. And then we've seen recently this has changed a lot. Now we're getting a lot of publications out really fast, and that has good and bad effects. Dave, could you comment on that?
Yes, absolutely true. There are some websites now that specialize in publishing draft scientific articles that have been submitted to peer-reviewed journals but have not yet been accepted. Preprints. They're going up on the web. Some very interesting articles. And some of them are right and some of them are wrong. Some of them are serious and some of them are crackpot. There's a great urgency for information, and that's the reason scientists are posting their research on these preprint sites before the peer review process has been completed. And that's good, but it also means that there is some fake news out there. Well, it's a provocative phrase, Dave, and it's funny, but I don't think I want to actually embrace that phrase.
So there's another question, Dave.
Yeah.
if you're a scientist and you work on your favorite parasite or fungus or whatever, and you see something coming, is there a better way to warn the politicians, which basically have their own Darwinian imperative? How do we get through that?
Scientists talk to public health officials. Public health officials create pandemic preparedness plans, and then politicians ignore the pandemic preparedness plans. Some politicians more obdurately than others. We had a directorate of pandemic preparedness inside the National Security Council. It began with George Bush's administration. It was continued and expanded during the Obama administration, and it was closed down over the last 3 years by this administration. Our Directorate of Pandemic Preparedness closed down at the National Security Council just in time for a pandemic.
Wow. Any more questions? Yes.
Is there anything that can be done in?
Wait.
Is there anything that can be done in known reservoir hosts, such as the bats, to help combat the viruses before they spill over into human populations?
Yeah, very, very good question. A very an urgent question, even. Yes, when we know that there are animals, species of bats, for instance, carrying viruses with great potential danger for humans, there's a need to act. What do we do about this? Well, some people say, well, we should get rid of the bats. We should exterminate that species of bat. No, that's not the right answer. We should leave that species of bat alone. We should make sure that people are not coming in contact with that bat, exposing themselves to this virus. We should put constraints on the ability of people to go into caves with a sack and a shovel and mine guano and expose themselves to these viruses. We should put doors on those caves that bats can fly in and out through, but humans cannot enter. We should outlaw the selling of wildlife in wet markets. We should take measures to keep the wild animals carrying the dangerous viruses and the humans from coming in contact that exposes the humans to spillover.
Next question.
Are most pandemics created by zoonotic infections and diseases, or is it like a mix between non-zoonotic and zoonotic?
Most are zoonotic. According to several different sources, somewhere between 60 and 70% of human infectious diseases are zoonotic diseases in the strict sense, that they are viruses, bacteria, or pathogens that spill over from wild animals into humans. 60 to 70%. That includes some of the famous old ones like bubonic plague and new ones, new to us anyway, like Ebola and this COVID-19 virus. Yes, almost always it's something that is relatively new or absolutely new, coming from a wild animal, getting into humans, and we have no way of defending ourselves against it.
Okay, we're going to spray down that $5 bill, and you guys are going to have to vote to see who gets it. Okay. How many in favor of that last question? How many in favor of this question? 1, 2. Okay, you get it. Now, look, this whole course is based on no tests. It is in get the passion of the speaker. It's get the vision of the future. I think we were really weak on how to solve this pandemic. And part of it was just communications. Part of it was that scientists were held back from saying what they really think. We can't afford that. And science writers like this have to separate the wheat from the shaft, because scientists will say all kinds of crazy things. And that's why we have guys like this to try to make a little bit better sense of it. Thank you for coming to the class, and I'll see you on Monday, and maybe on D2L, the lecture, Mark Young's lecture, will be shorter and on it in a day or two. Thank you.